Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Philosophy has been around for a very long time, traceable in its earliest form all the way back to Socrates and the pre-Socratics. With the discipline's critical nature and the gravity of the matters being discussed, it is to no surprise that it is replete with entrenched and often spirited disagreement. Idealism against materialism, essentialism against existentialism, dualism against monism, but perhaps no rivalry as historically defined as that between rationalism and empiricism. Rationalists such as Descartes, Spinoza and Leibniz believe that knowledge can only come from reason, and that the intellect is solely capable of attaining truth. Whereas empiricists like John Locke and George Berkeley contrarily argue that the only source of knowledge is sense perception, and that we are all born tabula rasa, to borrow Locke's terminology, to learn exclusively through experience. One empiricist, a Scottish philosopher called David Hume, was particularly interested in drawing a distinction between statements about ideas and statements about the world. All the objects of human reason or inquiry may naturally be divided into two kinds, he says, relations of ideas and matters of fact. Of the first kind are the sciences of geometry, algebra and arithmetic. Propositions of this kind are discoverable by the mere operation of thought. Matters of fact, which are the second object of human reason, are not ascertained in the same manner, nor is our evidence of their truth, however great, of a like nature with the foregoing. So Hume separates statements into two categories, relations of ideas and matters of fact, the figurative fork being two-pronged. Two questions should present themselves. What exactly is Hume's fork doing, and what are his motivations for making it? So let's start with one. What exactly does the dichotomy do? Well, its primary claim is about the truth conditions of certain statements. The first class of things, relations of ideas, feature statements that have self-evident truth conditions, sentences that are true by definition. A bachelor is an unmarried man, a vixen is a female fox, all bodies have extension. Hume, of course, includes mathematical truths within this category. That the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the square of two sides, he rules, citing Pythagoras' theorem, is an affirmation that is intuitively and demonstratively certain. These kinds of truths are necessarily true and are called analytic statements. But surely, you may ask, a bachelor is not an unmarried man in Germany, for example. In Germany, an unmarried man is a Jugendseller. As Shakespeare said, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." To this, it's important to note that it's the relationship between the notion and the type of language used to discuss it that is analytic. The specific token words are themselves interchangeable. Another salient property of these analytic statements, by the way, is that the contrary of one implies a contradiction. There is no world where 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, for instance. To say that 2 plus 2 equals 5 is inherently contradictory. The second class of things, on the other hand, matters of fact, contain statements that aren't true just by definition. It is raining outside. Paris is the capital of France. COVID-19 originated in Wuhan, to choose a topical example. These true statements are only true because of how the world is. They are called synthetic statements. Unlike analytic statements, we can say the contrary of a synthetic truth. If we say Paris is not the capital of France, such a sentence would be false but not self-contradictory. It still remains an intelligible proposition, as there could be a possible world where Marseille is the capital of France. So far, so good. There certainly looks like there's a difference between analytic and synthetic statements, in terms of what makes them true. This leads us to 2. What are Hume's motivations for drawing this distinction? And this is where things get more epistemological. Hume says that analytic statements are knowable a priori, whereas synthetic statements are knowable a posteriori. These terms come from Euclid's Elements, but were popularized by the Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant in his Critique of Pure Reason. Essentially, a priori is a justification outside of experience. A posteriori, on the other hand, relies on experience. Broadly speaking, they are different ways of knowing. Science is subsequently characterized by Hume as being concerned with matters of fact, things that exist in the world. Its methodology relies on a posteriori evidence and experience, thus there can never be any certainty. This is hardly a criticism from Hume, but rather an observation. As the poet Walt Whitman once remarked, "I like the scientific spirit, the holding off, the being sure but not too sure, the willingness to surrender ideas when the evidence is against them." Mathematics, in contrast, is singularly involved with the abstract, accordingly relations of ideas and analytic truths. But why is Hume saying all this? Surely as an empiricist, he ought to prefer empirical means as a way of knowing, and maintain a cynicism towards rationalist a priori methods. Well, it's called Hume's fork for a reason. A cornerstone trait of a fork is that its prongs ought never to touch. Similarly, relations of ideas cannot influence matters of fact, and matters of fact cannot influence relations of ideas. A square has four sides is true by definition, sure, but its truth rests on definition alone. It's not true on the basis of us checking all the square things in the world and finding that they all have four sides. In short, analytic truths inform us as to the nature of abstract entities, but don't really tell us anything of substance about the real world and what's in it. As the economist John Maynard Keynes wrote on mathematical economics, it makes us lose sight of the complexities and interdependencies of the real world in a maze of pretentious and unhelpful symbols. These kind of claims fundamentally contradict the philosophies of rationalists like Descartes, who believe that geometric truths, for example, hold formal reality. Another point to be made is that Hume's fork rules against rationalist arguments for God. According to Hume, all statements, including statements about God, are either a matter of fact or a relation of ideas. If the former, then the statement "God exists" is only to say that God exists in the material physical sense. This is obviously not what people refer to when they talk about God, so it must be the latter. However, if we state God exists as a relation of ideas, then this tells us nothing about the world, only about abstract things. Hume's fork then rules that statements about God are either trivial or meaningless, a pretty controversial claim considering the time period of his authorship, and one in service of Hume's veterate atheism. This thought is echoed by Bertrand Russell, who wrote, "I do not pretend to be able to prove that there is no God. The Christian God may exist, so may the gods of Olympus or of ancient Egypt or of Babylon. But no one of these hypotheses is more probable than any other. They lie outside the region of even probable knowledge, and therefore there is no reason to consider any of them." All things accounted for, it should now be clear why Hume drew such a dichotomy. He wanted an absolute, categorical, classificatory distinction to emphasize the difference between statements about ideas and the world. And, as an empiricist, he wanted to contradict the rationalist position that logical principles can prove the existence of God. Regardless of your thoughts on how well he achieved the second, the first can certainly be treated as a resounding success. Hume's taxonomy was one that all his contemporaries and immediate predecessors accepted, and the synthetic and analytic divide is still a core part of the study of epistemology and philosophy today. And I'm afraid that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, found it interesting, or just really love David Hume, please press that like button. And similarly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really shows your support for the videos we're putting out and is a great way to help more people see our content. Be sure to check out our other videos too. Who knows, you may find some interesting. And remember to hit that notification bell so that you know whenever we release a new video. You'll get it straight to your phone, laptop, watch, carrier pigeon, whichever you use. And I think that's it actually. As always everyone, thank you so much for watching.